go in front of the camera and say sorry for the technical difficulties, they're fixed, we're going to do live stream. Right now, they can probably hear that right now.
Airmen, we apologize for the technical difficulties, but we're back live. Hang on, we'll be back shortly.
How you do? Grab someone with brakes and tell everybody to hang on to the car. Alright, so as I get to bring you straight, just let me know. We're running. How would you do that? Wow.
If everybody can make it back to their seats as soon as possible, that'd be great. I was just told I wasn't talking loud enough. Everybody can make their way back to their seats. Appreciate it. Alright, so I'll move to this side of the stage. If everybody can make their ways back to their seats, that would be great. This side, you're doing awesome. So give yourself a round of applause over there. Now you follow directions too, that's really good. This side, terrible, horrible direction. Just kidding. Oh wow. The immense power that you have when you have a microphone standing up here and walking around, I think Dr. Roper just exuded that to me, so I picked up on that. You know, how inspiring. Everybody liking the summit so far? First two out the gate? Right? I mean, I feel inspired. Probably not as inspired as this guy over here. Dr. Roper said, take some risks, but I don't think he meant ask about a contract writing system to the Secretary of War. I like your moves, Joe Justin. Very good style, very great. Bold. Speaking of style, our next presenter is the commander of the Air Force Installation Contracting Agency. That's right. Her contracting authority extends worldwide across 8 major commands. Additionally, upon activation, she is designated as the commander of a Joint Theater Support Contracting Command. So who better than to ask to come up and talk about readiness? Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome Brigadier General Trevino to the stage.
Flexibility is the key to air power, right? Oh, don't stand too close to the microphone. Okay. So, General Holt asked me to talk about readiness, and actually, I have a story. So, I am a proponent of adult learning, and I feel that adults learn best by stories. So, quick story. Board of Directors meeting in December. General Holt asked us, hey, you're going to speak at my worldwide if we get it approved, because he left the bod, went over, got the money, came back, told us thumbs up. Well, what do you want us to talk about? Whatever you want to talk about. Open. Okay, so let's fast forward to February. All right, I'm talking about anything I want to talk about. Well, what General Holt wants you to talk about is readiness. I said, oh, okay. So, exciting topic, and the flexibility is the key to air power part is how do you listen to the people that have talked before you? And how do you incorporate that in? So, all of my preparations with closed doors, Captain Mike Murrow, our exec, protecting you so I could figure out what I was going to talk pretty much out the window as of this morning. But we will use some of it. And with what I would like to, first of all, if you've ever spoken in front of a large audience, what is the first thing that they tell you to do? Not imagine people would have seen blah, blah, blah. You have to know your audience. You can't talk to your audience if you don't know your audience. So I would like to do a quick poll. So please stand up if you have over 15 years of contracting experience. Okay, so look around. These are the experience. Now, sit down if you don't have the answer to this, but if you have over 20, keep standing if you have over 20 years. Sorry, Dr. Hober. If you have over 25 years. Okay, if you have over 30. You have over 35. If you have over 40. Yay! Major General Retired Daryl Scott. The reason we ask that question is because we want you to look around to see where your experience is in the room. Now, stand up if you have between 5 and 15 years of contracting experience. So, Dr. Roper, I don't use that term either. I'm not going to say it. It's like Voldemort or whatever. The frozen tundra. I'll call you the frozen tundra. This is a group of people who are more senior, but not as senior as the group that we just polled. And they have a great deal of experience in readiness as well. So take a seat, please. All right. I'm not going to lie to you. This is my next favorite. This is my favorite group. Please stand up if you have less than 5 years. Okay, so you guys are going to keep standing for a little bit because General Holt wishes this group was a little bit larger. Because you're our next generation, I wish this group was a little bit larger, and that's what we're growing to. We have to have every single group represented. Now, sit down if you have, keep standing if I answer my question here, if you fall into that category, but sit down if you don't. If you have less than 4 years. Just a few. If you have less than 3 years. Less than 2 years. You have less than 1 year. Thank you for being here. Thank you for trusting us, and I will tell you, we're in the same category here, myself, General Holt, Dr. Roper. You can email us at any time that you want to. We have an open door, we have an open email. It's just usually that sometimes your supervisors or bosses also want to know what you have to say because maybe they haven't heard it yet and they can solve your issue before one of us, well, don't touch yourself, okay. Okay, so let's see. You may sit down. Thank you for coming. Awesome. We're here to talk to you about readiness. Now, let's see, the second lieutenant, who's Abil. Getting ready to go, you can stand. She's getting ready to go on her first deployment. Please stand if you are getting ready to go on your first deployment within the next 6 or 7 months and you already know about it. All right, 1, 2, 3. Okay, and 4. So, awesome, pretty daunting. Are you nervous? A little bit? Okay, good. good? No, absolutely not. I know everything. I'm ready to go. They gave me a checkbook. So readiness, as Dr. Roper said, he said, you can say, get comfortable with getting uncomfortable, right? I collect sayings, and they kind of help me in the way that I process information. I'm a skilled learner, trying to learn about adult learning. How do you chunk information, and how does it resonate with you? So all throughout my life, you would hear this saying that said, get outside of your comfort zone. And I was like, what does that really mean? Because as someone who's getting ready to deploy, getting outside your comfort zone is pretty much like this. And then you go back. So I'll just expose you to a new saying that builds on that, and it's to expand your comfort zone. Because as a second lieutenant, this is really uncomfortable. This is uncomfortable. And I go back to it. Actually, this is kind of boring. This is comfortable. This is comfortable. This is comfortable. This is pretty much where we're at now, you know, after the folks that stood up that have over 15, 20, 25 years. Because you get more comfortable and more comfortable with getting uncomfortable, that what you did a year ago is actually very boring. And so this morning, we have listened to some awesome leaders, and we talked a little bit about some of the things that I'm going to continue talking about. I may not even get to the slides. Who likes slides? Stand up if you like slides. Some people like slides. You want to see it, you know, if you're a visual learner. But I don't want to take away from, you know, Major Jordan Sipkes did the slides, so we will get to some of them. But we talked about the why we do things, and that's so we know what to do, and then how to do it. And so we have this National Defense Strategy. And General Holt asked, who here has read the National Defense Strategy? Okay. Who has not read the National Defense Strategy yet? And it's okay if you have not. Okay. It is 11 pages. It is like the Worldwide Training Conference or Summit this week, where it hasn't been in 10 years. The National Defense Strategy was the first NDS in over 10 years. It's not just well written. It doesn't just provide clarity. It is one of the best foundational documents that I've ever read in over 25 years and the 4 years in the academy. Because it makes sense and it resonates, and it was a group of folks that wrote it understood you as the reader needed to understand what you were going to do. And then as you get into your functionals and as you work with your multifunctional teams, that's where we get to the how. And so I have a favorite line in the entire NDS. And much as General Holt said that the NDS is about acquisition, now here's a factoid. Guess how many times the word acquire or acquisition is in the NDS? 1,
26.
2, 0. 0. Guess how many, the closest thing is procure. Procure or procurement is in there 3 times. I don't need to have the word acquisition in the NDS to know it's about acquisition. And I know that none of you do either. But my favorite line is where it says, we must outthink, outmaneuver, outpartner, and out-innovate our adversaries. And then it gives the 3 lines of effort. And that's what mission-focused business leaders do. You outthink, you outpartner, you out-innovate, and you outmaneuver. The how is a little bit harder. And so we have this flight plan. We have a flight plan that has our 4 levels of effort, and you can not just read about it, you can listen to it. Where's Amber? Amber Pecorelli. Is she here? Okay, see Amber in the back? So she has, and under Ms. Heidi Bullock's leadership, created the AFCWWTS Contracting Experience podcast. And so you can go there, I think it's episode 8, that will introduce you to the mission focus, the business leader, and the flight plan, and more of the how. And then if you download episodes 9 and 10, you can listen to some of our senior leaders talk about each of their areas, each of their levels of effort, and then talk more about into the how. And so as adult learners, because we're all adults, right? Do we have any kids in here? One child. We're here to protect you. You are our future. That's the what, that's the why, that's the what, that's the how, and that's how we get there. Now, has anybody read, I hope this also hands you up, Air Force Posture Review? Released last week. Excellent, Dr. Roper, very happy you read it. General Holmes, very happy you read it. Everybody else, go read it. It's 4 pages. It's 4 pages, it's less than 4 pages, and it's everything that Secretary Wilson has been talking to us about for the last 2 years. It feeds off of the National Defense Strategy, and I have a favorite saying in there too. And my favorite saying in there is, we will never sacrifice quality at the expense of speed. True. You hear a lot about speed, but our leaders are not telling us to sacrifice quality just to go faster. And you heard Dr. Roper this morning, pretty much tell us that. He wants you to think, he wants you to critically think, he wants you to provide those innovative ideas. So now, as an LOE, level of effort of LOE 4, readiness, I wanted to also introduce you. I'm afraid to touch mine, because I don't want to turn off the screecher. Okay, make sure I grab the right part. Okay. We have 17 mission-focused business leaders on LOE 4. So, if you can stand, Colonel Derek Blau, Colonel Brian Ucciardi, Rob Wigman, Chris Webner. Have you guys been pronouncing Colonel Ucciardi's name incorrectly? Brian, correct? Yes. See? His dad told me. Pete Lash, Butch Ray is not here. Mr. Scott Callisti. Rob Campbell, is Rob here? Chief Master Sergeant James Teague. Nathan Wallace. Lieutenant Colonels Pete O'Neill and Jack Jackman. Lieutenant Colonel Select Casey Pease, Major Jordan Sifkees, Major Brian Ewing, Captain Bill Englehart, Senior Master Sergeant Jonathan Tringali. All right, these 17 outstanding mission-focused business leaders and change agents, if you have ideas about readiness, or you want to volunteer to be on LOE 4, you want to talk to them. Later in the week, we're having our breakout, I think Thursday, Senior Sergeant Tringali, is that correct? Tomorrow, Tuesday. You may also go to them and they'll give you more details on the how, but we want to hear your ideas. So you may, thank you. And a round of applause for them. So please talk to them and share your ideas. And please volunteer, because we know that you guys have good ideas. All right. Here's where you show me the next slide. If I say next slide, it'll magically go to the next slide. Okay. Small overview. Now, there's a method to to our madness here. Readiness, development, integration, and proficiency. It is not a mistake that if you are a mission-focused business leader, that you are ready, developed, you know how to integrate, and you're proficient. I'll just let that sink in for a little bit. So we're going to talk and walk through some of the what we want you to do and the how. And we're going to talk to you about each of our objectives and what those objectives are trying to achieve. But the ultimate goal of those is just as General Holt said this morning. We want you to be better and stronger mission-focused business leaders. So that, I like what Dr. Roper said, I wrote it down. He said, get spicy. You see, there was like a theme. So General Holt said, don't shut up. And I wrote down, don't be quiet. And then they said, be bold. We want to make sure that you're empowered. And I feel like that says, expand your comfort zone because you have as much power as you need. It's just keep going. When you stay put, you're stagnant. In AFCWWTS, we have a mantra which is directly aligned with mission-focused business leadership, and we call ourselves change agents. We're mission-focused business leaders that understand change. And one of the things that we do for new folks, so when I asked the team to step, the folks that were here that have less than 5 years experience, and I say, you're a mission-focused business leader, these words will help you understand how to grow into an even stronger one, because you're all leaders, you're influencing everybody that you work with and people that you serve every day. As change agents, we found that people didn't understand, well, I don't know what it means to be a change agent. And so we came out with some, a mnemonic device under STARS, and we said, if you're a change agent, there's a star to help you, and you start with reading the strategic documents, which is what we went over a little bit this morning, the NDF, the Air Force Posture Review, the flight plan, and the T is to take on the goals and initiatives that are in those documents. The A is alignment. A is so important. If I'm not aligned, if I'm not understanding what General Holt wants us to do, and we're not communicating, if I don't understand the direction that Dr. Roper has given me, if I don't understand where Secretary Shanahan, our acting Secretary of Defense, wants to go, then I'm either misaligned or I'm going in the wrong, I'm really, going in the wrong direction. And the R is reaching out to our mission partners. It doesn't matter. We say that you can have this great idea and you're not going to get the credit. Another great saying that I heard 25 years ago, do it for the love because the glory is not always there. And that drives me like every day. And you don't seek glory, you're just doing it because you love it. And you love the joint warfighter and what that means. We are in a great power competition. And so we have to do everything that we can do to make sure that our warfighters, just as it says up here, lethality. And readiness brings us that. So next slide. For readiness, we have, we went through the National Defense Strategy. Next slide. Going over to page press. I'm not certified. Oh, no, we're back. Okay. Oh, now we're fighting each other. Next slide. Okay. Achieving peace through strength requires the joint force to deter conflict through preparedness for war. That's our national defense strategy. But when someone talks to me about readiness, lots of things come to mind. Preparedness. Are you prepared to go to war? We would never send somebody out to deploy if they weren't ready. They wouldn't even meet the minimum standards to go out. But readiness is also more than, it's more than being ready to go out the door. It's really being ready to help your mission partners at any time, no matter what they want. And I'm not going to go into our key results and go deep down into our flight plan, but there's some pictures on here that kind of help us what this part of the objective is going to do. Our goal again is so that we're ready, that our contingency contracting force is ready. But when I was thinking about what to kind of talk with the audience today, an example that I had in my personal life was about, actually it was a year ago, less than a year ago, not more than a year ago, but the results of that have been less than a year. So I've been in the seat as the FICA commander since May 23rd of last year, and so not quite yet a year. But before that I was Secretary Shanahan's principal military assistant. And I was in that role for 10 months. And before that, I was the DCMA Western Region Commander, and got a phone call one day. We were at the headquarters, and actually I got an email, very random email from a name that I didn't know. I was like, is this me? And it said, your name has been forwarded by the Air Force to interview for a position for Secretary Shanahan. And my eyes got this big, and I called General Retired Marciello. What is this? I don't know. Me neither. Here, let me see. You should talk to these people. Talk to these people. Okay. I call them. I'm like, you just got this email. How fast is this interview going to be? Because I'm in TDY right now, and I expect it to be at the Pentagon. And they said, how about next Tuesday? So it's Wednesday, the interview's next Tuesday. So go home, do all this preparation. Now, if you, at the time, so that was in August of 2017, Secretary Shanahan, there were only a couple of stories about him that were on the newsreel, public affairs, like looking for Deputy Secretary of Defense Shanahan, what's he saying? And there were a couple articles about him, knew he had worked for Boeing previously, understood kind of his background, his bio. He's all about lethality. He's all about bringing a business mindset and critical thinking to the department. He's about reform, and reform not necessarily, you can't have, it's about process and talent, but both have to go together. You cannot have talented people succeed if they have bad processes. That's what he believes. So I did my preparations. I'm ready to go to the interview. Secretary Shanahan's not the interviewee. It was his staff. And so kind of all your preparations out the window, and now this is who you're meeting with. Conduct your interview. It went well. I did get the job, but I think that's only because of all the preparations that the Air Force has helped me with at the time, over 24 years. Now I have over 25 years. And that position that I was offered, one of the things that helped edge out some of my competition was because I had a contracting background. And there was nobody on that floor, the E-ring as they call it in the Pentagon, that had contracting experience. And so it was the opportunity of a lifetime. Every day was different, and I never read so much material in my life. I thought when I had gone to some of our developmental education classes that this was, that I had already read everything, but no, I was wrong. So my job was to read every single package that went across the Secretary's office, and that was Secretary Shanahan and Secretary Mattis at the time. So if you ever have to deal with Secretary Shanahan, our acting Secretary of Defense, I will give you a hint. I'm about to give you his favorite book. His favorite book, which will help us, can help us today. It's called Freedom's Forge, and it has to do with how the United States industry was at the time before we went into World War II, and how two scions of industry helped us overcome that dearth in experience in industry that befell the United States between World War I and World War II. So, excellent book. You can get it on podcast again. I said adult learning, and I believe in adult learning. And so you have to decide: are you a listener? Are you a reader? Do you like everything? Do you take notes, etc.? But I'm listening to those on podcasts. I do listen to Amber's podcasts, and the readiness piece. Being able to be ready it's not simple. It's needed, but it's not simple, and so it's well worth your time. All right, next slide. Development. Sharpen expeditionary contracting capabilities. So when our team first put this, we did a lot of wordsmithing, and you'll notice that this says development. It's not training. It's not necessarily learning. It is development. You cannot be combat credible if you don't develop your workforce. And so this component of our Air Force Flight Plan and readiness at large is also not just about expeditionary contracting. It's about everybody in this room, even if you're not an operational acquisition. It has to do with systems acquisition. It has to do with making sure that we have a tiered approach to how we educate, how we help people understand the difficult or challenging learning objectives, and then how we execute that, like how we deploy that type of learning. And so this piece has contingency contracting kits on there. We work with staff AQC and FICA to make sure that all of our operational acquisition teams have contingency contracting kits and tablets. But this is looking at learning the way that we have developed our CCOs over the last 15 years in a totally different mindset using scenario-based training. It also has we're bringing back Silver Flag. Silver Flag. Oh, here it goes. Oh, I love to pull the audience. Who here remembers Top Dollar? Okay, now you guys stand up. If you can still stand up. Top Dollar was awesome. It was going out to the field. Everyone, we did it at the time with just our FMs, and I don't even think we had lawyers at the time. I think we finally, I don't know, Nate, we didn't bring you. Major Manshine? So then Top Dollar went away. And you may say so.
You can.
If you can. Silver Flag builds upon the legacy of Top Dollar. So the reason I asked that question is because if somebody in the room stood up, you saw them stand up, go ask them what Top Dollar was. And then as we go into Silver Flag, I think that Chief Team just sent me the numbers. We're going to have 15 classes a year. Each class is going to have 8 members per year. And the goal is to not just develop you, but to prepare you before you go, hopefully, on your first deployment. There'll be a mixture. The 8 folks, they have a presumption of what those skill levels will be, but they'll take, so you want somebody from Tier 1 who's never deployed. You want someone from a Tier 2 who has deployed, who has more experience, and then with working with Tier 3 folks who have a warrant, so that we have a good mixture, so that you're learning in the classroom from your other students, and then you're also learning from the instructors. And I could not be more thrilled that we're getting ready to start our first class, the beta test in May and the pilot test in June. So that's pretty thrilling. The bottom right picture there is to remind us that we also have base exercises. And on your base, we have some bases that don't involve contracting in the base exercise. You may not even work with your other mission partners. You may be in your own little area. The contracting squadron commander says we're going to do our own little mini exercise, but it doesn't feed into the larger exercise. I actually know of bases who simulate contracting. I don't know how you do that, but they've done it. And this objective goes after how do you get that into the regular battle rhythm, and so that you actually have mission scenarios, exercise lists that you're exercising to prove that you have met those capabilities. And that's what contracting is. Expeditionary contracting is a warfighting capability. Pretty exciting. All right, next slide. Integration. So integration means a lot to a lot of different people. But I heard it best simplified by Secretary Mattis when he was the Secretary of Defense. If you know Secretary Mattis, his experience, before he became the Secretary and retired, he was in the Marine Corps. And the Marine Corps has we have AFIs, they have instruction, and it's called Command and Feedback. Do we have any Marines? Let me just make sure. One Marine. Okay. Command and Feedback. Have you read the instruction? Okay. It's okay. I will synthesize it for you. It says, this is awesome. What do you know? Who needs to know it? Have you told them? If not, what is your plan to get that information to them? That's pretty much what this objective goes after. Expeditionary contracting, command and control, we have a lot of information. We don't care who gets the credit, but what we do care about is making sure that those commanders and decision makers have that information that we have so that they can make the best decisions possible. And if we don't do that, we're not integrating. Again, we're not aligned. And we're probably not just leaving money on the table potentially, but we could be contributing to even worse things, especially in the joint realm and in the operational environment. So you have the conflict continuum there, and you got to have a Sun Tzu quote. Always have to have a Sun Tzu quote. The victorious strategist only seeks battle after victory has been won. The conflict continuum, what we're focusing there is proactive engagement. Not just communication, but integrating with information that we have. Information operations at its best, but left of when you really need it. The earlier, the better. The earlier that you engage, the more proactive that you are preemptively, potentially preventing something that could occur, that could be a catastrophic event. We call it unintended consequences. I'm telling you that they're probably not unknown consequences. It's just what you didn't want to happen because you potentially weren't communicating. And we have to integrate. And the people in this audience, you mission-focused business leaders, do this the very best in the Air Force. But you got to do it at the right time. And sometimes it's about resonating. As General Holt said, the table here with Mr. Williams, Mr. Scott, Ms. Nasiello, they have all been about mission-focused business leadership for their entire careers. And now we're calling it mission-focused business leadership. But that's so that we have a direction and we all know where we're going, and it helps us to get to the how. It doesn't help if you know the what and the why and you never get to the how. And it doesn't help if you have a warfighting capability and you're not sharing it. And so that's what we're going after here. The business intelligence That's a future state that we don't have today. But if I can look at my environment, if I go to PACOM in the Pacific Theater, and I know what my in C2 command and control for contracting, if I know what my vendor base is, if I know how many vendors I have in a certain location, if I know what their capabilities are, if I understand graph, if I know the economic impacts, I can bring that forward and we can make decisions about organic and non-organic contracts in that theater that now make us better positioned to outwit, out-partner, out-innovate, and out-maneuver our adversaries. Next slide. My favorite. I'll say proficiency. OCS competencies. It's not just about contracting. It's about operational contract support. Who knows what OCS is? Stand up. All right, the goal of this objective is that everybody stands up. Now, if you're not standing up, it's okay. Go ahead and sit down. What this objective is trying to do, and will do, is to make sure that every single enlisted officer and civilian member understands what OCS is. Now, again, I learned through stories, and there was a part of me and a time in my life that I thought OCS was just about contracting. That was until probably my third deployment. I've been on 5 deployments. My third deployment was out of TRANSCOM in the CENTCOM Deployment Distribution Operations Center. It was not a contracting deployment. It was all intra-theater airlift in the AOR. And if we weren't integrating, if I and my team members hadn't been developed, and if we weren't prepared, we could have never made sure that at that time, which was 2009, 2010, that instead of trying to get in as many MRAPs in theater, we could not get as many MRAPs out of theater that we needed to get for the operational mindset, or operational constraints at that time. Now, we have a couple of recent examples, and not going, who here works in foreign military cells or weapon systems contracting? Stand up, please. Okay? OCS applies to you as well. If you have an FMS customer, all right, you can sit, and that needs your equipment that you're awarding a contract for. Case in point, country X in Europe just bought a $1 billion weapon system from the United States, but that delivery system cannot occur until a construction project happens, MILCON otherwise, maybe by USACE, it may be by local contracting. Do you think that that has political ramifications? It does. If we're not connecting those dots faster than our adversaries, you may not even know that a $2 million construction contract can derail a $1 billion program in the blink of an eye. And I have seen it happen. And then there's a lot of a flurry of activity as people are trying to get information. And just one slide ago, we said that integration piece, you have to be able to integrate and be proactive and give that information and be as fast as you can about connecting the dots, because we're influencing billion-dollar decisions and it may be a small amount of money. So it's not simple. There are interconnectedness and networking complications and linkages through everything that we do. So it's pretty cool. All right, this is also going after that we coordinate and work with the A staff and the J staff. And just like on the earlier slide where we said business intelligence, This is also providing business intelligence and a potential dashboard that will actually help the COCOM commander. It's not just the vendor capability, it's connecting those dots so that that theater understands here's the economic implications at a very high level, taking the after-action reports from previous CCOs and providing that information in a way that the decision maker and our commanders and our senior leaders can make decisions with them as fast as they can. And that's how we achieve greatness. So, pretty cool. So, that's my last slide, but go to the next one. I'm going to remind you of what it means to be a mission-focused business leader. Being ready, being developed, being integrated, and being proficient. And as Dr. Roper said, getting spicy, being bold. We're empowering our folks because we do want to make sure that we have the best warfighting force. We are the most lethal, and that you and every one of your folks that aren't here, I don't think that's been said yet this morning, but Dr. Roper said, hey, I have a challenge for you. Your challenge is to make me uncomfortable. I'm gonna simplify my challenge. My challenge is every single one of you, you have to meet at least 5 new people that you haven't met before you got here. And if you're here, you have to go back and you have to present to your team what you've learned this week, the top 5 things. So that's my challenge to you, and that's how we pay it forward. Because this right here, this is an opportunity to be here, and if you saw the email from General Holt that went out, we wish that we could have all 8,000 strong here. We do have on the Facebook platform, and we're broadcasting live, I think, I don't know. But how do you, when you're not here, make sure that everyone else is learning and exposed to the same information so that we can outwit, out-partner, out-innovate, and outmaneuver our adversaries. Thank you.
Just as you said, flexibility is the key to air power. We're going to push through our break. And I know we have Q&A or questions out there in the field. We're going to save those for the executive steering group tomorrow for General Trevino. I'd like to invite Major General Holt to the stage. Today we want to present Brigadier General Trevino with the 2019 Influential Leader by the Association for Advanced Collegiate Schools of Business. Brigadier General Ali Trevino, Naval Postgraduate School MBA class of 2007, stands out among fellow alumni and peers as one of the department's foremost acquisition leaders and innovators. General Trevino has put her business education into practice, not only to innovate within DoD, but has also had a positive source of change for global business. She also continues an active program of engagement with NPS, its faculty, and students. Ma'am, congratulations on your selection.
All right. I get the great honor to introduce to you our next speaker. It's Dr. John Trevino. And some of you who know me know I'm a big fan of strategic partnerships. And in fact, we have a tremendous strategic partnership with the Naval Postgraduate School. In fact, we've pretty much taken over the whole school. When I was out there last year, I made a joke that I said, hey, I love it when you invite me out here to do curriculum reviews for me and moderate panels. And I just love it, except for one thing. What are all these Navy folks doing in my school? And I'm sorry, they have to go. You can keep the anchor out front, but other than that, it's the Air Force's school now. Ironically, we don't have as strong of partnerships with our own academic institutions. And I think that needs to change. Academia adds a lot of value to what we're going after in mission-focused business leadership. It It adds value to, obviously, to the category management business through the Naval Postgraduate School and AFCWWTS. And what we're getting after in returning to our roots, our culture as airmen, I want to foster this strategic relationship with the Air Command and Staff College, with Dr. Trevino and his folks, with Air University, and tapping back into who we are as airmen. I stand before you, an airman, before I'm a business leader, before I'm a program manager, before I'm a requirements officer, and if you don't tell anybody, before I'm a budget officer. All of those things that I have experience in. But I feel blessed that the Air Force has given me a lot of educational opportunities to really understand what the employment of airspace and cyberspace power is all about. And blessed to have an education in history and an education in the history of warfare, the strategy of warfare. And the Air Force has a tremendous heritage that we can build upon, and that's what I want us to harken back to. It is our culture. It is what we bring to the fight. What General Trevino said it great. We outthink our enemies. That's what we do. We don't outrun them. We outthink them. And so Dr. Trevino is going to come to the stage now and drive home some of those points and bring us back to our heritage as airmen and how that ties to mission-focused business leadership. So Dr. Trevino.
So hopefully my mic is turned on, and it is. All right. So I have to stand up here and give you a confession. I'm actually the second best person invited to do this. Dr. Dick Deso, my good friend, the ultimate oxymoron, the fighter pilot with a PhD. He was too busy teaching at South Carolina and couldn't make it. But in many ways, just as every one of you as an airman is a legacy of Hap Arnold, I'm also a legacy of Dick Deso, because the reason I got my PhD the Air Force sent me is because he ran a program that actually picked me, and then I got my PhD, and I've been able to stand in front of hundreds of students every year and talk about air power heritage in a different way. I also thought it was kind of odd that I was going to be here on April Fool's Day. I was kind of worried about that, but this is a great air power birthday. In case you didn't know, today is the anniversary, the 101st anniversary of the founding of the Royal Air Force, the world's first independent air force, the 95th anniversary of the founding of the Royal Canadian Air Force, and it's the 65th anniversary of the actual founding of the Air Force Academy, in case you didn't know that. So connecting that all together, because Hap Arnold's dream was to create something like the Air Force Academy and have something like we have here. See, there we go, it's working. Okay, the way ahead is we're going to talk a little bit about Hap Arnold and why he is a mission-focused business leader, and how his legacy empowers us as airmen even today. His DNA was actually basically grafted into the Air Force, if I can make a sort of biology argument about this. The way he did business, the way he did things, the vision he had for the Air Force, he is probably the real father of the Air Force. Now, there's kind of a debate about this. If you go out to the Air Force Academy, you'll see all kinds of great buildings that commemorate some of our great leaders. You know, you've got Mitchell Hall there on the bottom, the dining hall, a significant building in and of itself, named after Billy Mitchell, and he is the father of the Air Force in one sense. But Hap Arnold surrounds us in almost everything we do. Arnold Hall is the social hall on the Academy. These buildings are diagonally apart from each other on both ends of the campus. But we have the Arnold Air Society. If you're an ROTC, that's something to aspire to. We've got an actual Air Force base named after Hap Arnold, the Test and Development Center, one of the premier aircraft aviation testing facility centers in the world. And of course, the logo that we use for the Chief of Staff is often called the Hap Arnold logo, because that was the logo he used when he was the commanding general of the Army Air Forces in World War II. So whether we're aware of it or not, Hap Arnold permeates everything we do. And hopefully by the end of this presentation, you'll understand that. Most of us think of Hap Arnold as General Hap Arnold, the 5-star general who ended the war, who became the only 5-star general in the United States Army and the United States Air Force ever. And this older, avuncular, sort of sage-like guy. But the guy we really need to emulate, the guy we need to really think about, is the younger Hap Arnold. The man who learned everything there was to know about air power because he did most of it himself. General Holt alluded to this earlier. It was in the PACE presentation you saw. He was a record setter, earned the first McKay Trophy. He wrote the first -1. He experimented dramatically with early aviation. He was trained by the Wrights. and he flew one of the early Wright models that the Army Air Service had bought, and it had a fatal flaw in it. And he almost died in an unrecoverable dive at Fort Riley, Kansas. Walked away from that a little shaken, put his wings away for a few years, and it was a good thing that he did, because of the first 25 or so aviators in the United States Air Force predecessor, roughly over half of them were killed in action. The rest of them decided they never want to fly again, and very few of them survived. Arnold was one of the guys that survived. And he went back to the infantry, and just as World War I was breaking out, after he'd gotten married, because you used to not be allowed to be married and be a pilot because it was so dangerous, then they changed the rules. And the United States was getting ready to go into World War I. Arnold wanted command. He wanted to go and fight. And he went to Washington with the idea that he was going to shake these orders that he had that were sending him to the Panama Canal Zone and send him to Europe, where the fighting was. And everybody there realized that there was nobody else who knew more about air power than Hap Arnold did, so they made him a staff officer. And Hap Arnold became the youngest colonel in the United States Army during World War I because he built what we had for an Air Force during World War I. And it was woeful. We started really badly. The nation that invented the airplane could not even really field anything close to combat power in the air. And we struggled mightily during the couple of years the United States was involved in World War I to produce anything of value that could be used at the front in terms of aviation. And we built a lot of infrastructure, we spent a lot of money. The largest appropriation that Congress had ever given up to that point was spent to build an Air Force, and Hap Arnold learned some very valuable lessons. Number one, you can't build air power overnight. You can't build the infrastructure that air power requires, because a lot of airmen think air power is about pilots and planes, and Arnold knew much better than that. It's about people, it's about industry, it's about science, it's about technology. It's about runways, it's about bases, it's about training, education, and then you get to the part about putting everything at the tip of the spear. And Arnold knew you couldn't do that overnight, partly because he knew it beforehand, and partly because he lived it during World War I. And he vowed that the United States would never be in that situation again, as you heard in that PACE presentation. But he went back after World War I to just being captain, and then very briefly captain, and then Major Arnold. And he was in command of a small unit out in San Diego that was downsizing dramatically. And he was going to have to sit there and struggle to build it all again. Now, one of the things that he experimented with in World War I, one of the things that gave him a lot more connections with science and technology and industry is this Kettering bug. You know, he knew the Wright brothers, he knew Glenn Curtiss, he knew all the early aviators who made airplanes. He knew them personally. And then he started to meet inventors like Kettering, who invented all kinds of things that we take for granted in automobiles today, like self-starters and that sort of stuff. And he became involved with these types of people. In his off time, he would go to the National Standards Bureau in Washington, and he would go look at how they measured things, how they did science and technology. He knew this was going to be important, and he just had an affinity for it anyway. But in the interwar period, he grew as an airman and an air leader, but he had an innate sense of things that marked him a little different. And here's example number one. 1926, Hap Arnold's sitting there in Washington. He's the Chief Information Officer for the Air Corps, just recently named the Air Corps. And that's a job that sounds like he's doing public relations, but what he really is he's also the intelligence chief for the Air Force. So he's getting all the information that comes from all the sources, and he's deciding what goes to the boss, what goes out to the public, and what goes to everybody else. And he starts reading reports that there's a flying organization, a commercial airliner, one of the oldest commercial airlines in the world, down in Colombia, that is flying routes. It's a German-Colombian partnership, essentially. And the Germans, restricted by the Versailles Treaty, can't develop long-range aviation. They can't develop a lot of things that we take for granted, especially in Germany, but there's a lot of government support for Lufthansa and building airplanes. And one of the ways they're expanding their reach is by expanding into South America. And this company wants to start flying up into the United States. And in order to do this, they're going to have to do the limitations for airplanes at the time, fly through the Panama Canal Zone. And Arnold realizes that this is a strategic problem. We need to protect the canal zone. We can't let this happen. But at the same time, the United States is now letting out airmail contracts that are sponsored by the government. And any company can bid for these. And he quickly realizes that this company is going to bid and probably win the contract because there's nobody in the United States who's willing to do this. And Arnold's sitting there, roughly 20 years of service. He can retire. He's defended Billy Mitchell at his court-martial. That might not be a good thing for his career. He's also been sending out stuff to Congress, and Mason Patrick, the chief of the Air Corps, is not really happy with him. So he thinks, you know, I might need another opportunity. So he quickly puts together on paper, with his good buddy Tooey Spots, and a former Navy flyer, James Montgomery, the proposal for Pan American Airways. The key being, we get that mail route between Key West and Havana, Cuba, and we can expand where we need to in South America and blunt this company from doing something that is bad, is in the bad strategic interest of the United States. And it's all on paper, because Arnold's never run an airline himself. He hasn't done any of that. Meanwhile, Lon Tripp, who everybody associates with Pan American Airways, who went to Yale, is well connected with everybody who's rich, and has run an airline and failed at it, has started another airline and succeeded at it. He thinks that he needs to get in on this. So he goes to Havana and negotiates with President Machado landing rights for Havana. So nobody else is going to win this contest because he's already got the only rights to land the mail in Havana. But he realizes that Arnold and some of these other guys are in competition. Might be tough to make sure he gets the contract. So he basically buys Arnold and those guys out. And Arnold changes his mind. He says, you know what? I'm going to fight for what I believe in inside the Air Force. He goes to Fort Riley, commands a squadron, and starts working his way back into the good graces of the Air Corps leadership. So a guy with strategic vision who understands how to make different choices outside the box that can make a difference, leveraging his experience. For the next roughly decade, Hap Arnold will go through materiel leadership. He'll be at Wright Field, learning about the engineering side of things. He'll go to the Staff College. He'll end up at March Field for about 5 years as a commander. This will be the happiest time in his Air Force career. His wife is happy, his family is happy, he's doing operational stuff, he's doing what he likes to do the most. But the most important thing that comes out of this assignment is he starts to develop strong connections with science, industry, media, the cinema. By this point, he's already written a number of books for kids. He's got another book on the shelf he's getting ready to write, and he'll write another one for popular audiences explaining what the Air Corps does and why you want to be a part of it. So he can message how important air power is to the nation. March Field is perfectly suited to be connected to Hollywood, and Arnold will leverage this. The movie's Hell's Angels comes out in the early 30s. Howard uses massive, hundreds of airplanes, thousands of extras, aviation spectacular. It makes Gene Harlow into a star. Ben Lyons gets his big start, big jump in his career from that. Bebe Daniels, his wife, will become, continue to evolve in Hollywood after being a star in the 1920s. And Arnold is there with them, inviting them to March Field for air shows, having them dedicate the theater when it's open, and getting them to spread the gospel of air power to the popular audiences in the United States. And Arnold understands that this is important because the Air Corps is going to need this if anything happens in the future. He also starts doing professional networking internally in the Air Corps. In 1934, we have what's known as the airmail fiasco. The United States Army Air Corps is asked to supply all the airmail for the United States because there's supposed to be corruption in the contracts that have been let for this. And we'll just take a time out, let the Army do it, and then we'll redo those contracts, President Roosevelt says. And the Air Corps fails spectacularly. We can't fly at night. We can't fly in bad weather. We can't deliver mail bags. And people wonder if we can even deliver bombs. 12 airmen go to their deaths in the short period this is being done. Arnold is lucky he commands the western side. Not just lucky, he's skilled. He makes sure his guys don't have those kind of issues. And he comes out of this as the most successful commander. But the Air Corps is really hurting at the end of this. We need to prove to the people of the United States and to the world that we actually can do something. So Arnold is put in charge of what's called the Alaska mission, the 1934 Alaska flight, we take the newest bombers the United States Army Air Corps has, the Martin B-10. This is a revolution in aircraft. Enclosed cockpits, faster than any fighter, streamlined, capable, long range. And he flies them from Washington, D.C. to Alaska and back with no mishaps. Navigate correctly, make every time, set records. He gets another McKay trophy, but more importantly, he gets the Air Corps back into the public's good graces and proves the potential of what air power can do. After this, there we go. Networking even more, okay? Donald Douglas, owner of Douglas Aircraft in Long Beach, California. Arnold's seeing him all the time when he's at Marchfield. He's hunting with him, he's dining with him. They get so close that Arnold's son ends up marrying Douglas's daughter. Talk about your kind of connections, okay? Malin Craig is Arnold's Army superior. He is in charge of the entire state of California as a military district, and Arnold networks with him. He goes up to San Francisco where he's based, he plays golf with him, he works with him, he explains to him what air power can do and how it can work, tries to get him out of his ground-centric kind of view of war and into a more air-centric mind. And he hangs out with Robert Millikan, a Nobel Prize winner on the California Institute of Technology faculty, and starts picking his brain on how science can do more for air power. And Millikan introduces him to Theodore von Karman, the noted aeronautical scientist, aeronautical engineer, who Caltech has wooed from Germany to set up what will eventually become the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. And von Karman is into rockets, and the people working with him are, and so Arnold gets interested in rockets also, and all sorts of other things. But this is the kind of non-traditional networking that most airmen are not doing, because Arnold understands that science and technology are vital to the success of air power in the present and in the future. By 1936, he's in Washington as the assistant commander of the Air Corps. When Oscar Westover gets killed in a plane crash in 1937, Arnold is made the chief of the Air Corps. He's in a place he doesn't want to be. Most airmen don't want to be in Washington, don't want to be in the predecessor to the Pentagon. This is a noted feeling. But he is now in a place where he can start to influence things in a way that he had been preparing his entire career for. Air power starts to become very important on an international scale, military air power in particular. The Munich crisis in 1938, Adolf Hitler basically gets the Sudetenland and the rest of Czechoslovakia by having a large air force. He unveiled the Luftwaffe in 1935. It was supposed to be illegal for Germany to have an air force. And when he unveiled it, nobody stopped him. He had more planes of more modern capability than the British and the French combined. And the British and the French were intimidated at the Munich conference. And they just gave up their ally, Czechoslovakia, to be swallowed up by Germany. And Roosevelt, as the president, an old Navy guy, saw this, and he said, we need air power. The Army Air Corps had roughly 1,700 planes total at this point. And Roosevelt said, we need 10,000. I want you to get me 10,000 planes, and I want you to do it right away. And Arnold kind of said, well, it's going to be a little harder than you think, boss, but I can do it. And Arnold leveraged all these connections he had, because Arnold did business very differently from most military leaders, most corporate leaders, and probably most air power leaders that we know. Arnold didn't have staff meetings. When he wanted something done with somebody on the staff, he told them personally what he wanted them to do. He was very energetic, mercurial almost. He had a lot of energy, a lot of drive. He typically would fly out of Washington and go visit bases, go visit industrial plants, go visit whoever he needed to on a regular basis. He was hardly in his office. He empowered a group of young officers he called his advisory council to keep him up to date on what the young officers in the Air Corps thought was going on, what the new ideas were, and all kinds of things that helped him be a better leader and a better manager, because he knew things that most of the guys who were his contemporaries didn't know. But he went out on these inspection trips and he would shake hands with industrialists and say, we're going to build a lot of airplanes, and I want you to help me. Now, he didn't necessarily have a contract for him yet, but he said, I'm promising you this is going to happen. And because they knew who he was, and they knew what he meant, and his word was bond, these guys started laying down factories. They started doing things to get ready for this. He also said, we need a lot of pilots. Where are we going to train them? Who's going to train them? We can't have our pilots train them because we need our pilots to fight. So they contracted with every single civil aviation pilot training school in America to do basic training for all our pilots for the Air Corps. And we're going to have to train these guys in proper military discipline. Where are we going to do that? So they went, and this is where I think the reputation for the Air Force and cable television and comfort starts. Let's go get hotels in Miami Beach. They can handle a lot of people. We'll put them in there, and we'll do their training there. And this is the kind of creative contracting, the kind of creative thinking that Arnold's people did because they wanted him to be ready. So Arnold started expanding the Air Corps. He had George Marshall's backing. Marshall understood air power better than just about any other Army leader. And as far as Marshall was concerned, Arnold was his equal. We didn't have a separate Air Force yet, but he was going to let Arnold do whatever he needed. Because he trusted Arnold, as did a lot of people. And when Arnold went to meetings, the Air Corps usually did very well. When Arnold was sick or Arnold didn't attend, the Air Corps didn't often do as well because nobody knew air power inside and out as well as how Arnold did, even before the war started. This is what Arnold did. This is how the Air Corps changed between 1939 and 1944. In 1939, when Pearl Harbor was attacked, in 1941 we had, I'm sorry, let me get this right. On September 1st, 1939, when World War II started, we had 19 B-17s in the inventory. We ended up with over 12,000 by 1945. The plane that was, as Arnold called it, air power you could touch, the strategic bomber that was going to make a difference, was so important that we didn't have even enough for a full squadron when the war kicked off in 1939. This didn't happen overnight, but it also happened because Arnold had a vision for what air power needed. And sometimes the Air Force gets accused of next war-itis. Well, Arnold made sure this happened, and he started thinking about what would be needed in the future simultaneously. AWPD-1 was drafted in 1941 because Roosevelt wanted to know what was it going to take to win. How much was it going to cost? How many people? How many tanks? How many ships? How many airplanes? So the air staff, the nascent air staff, Arnold got 9 guys, locked them in a room for a little over a week in the sweltering munitions building in August in Washington, and they came up with the victory plan. And they said this is what it would take. And they were almost exactly correct in terms of numbers of aircraft and numbers of people. But Arnold made sure that they had another mandate. He wanted numerical superiority, which we got, as you can see from that previous slide, but he also wanted qualitative superiority. We had to have better planes. And when the war kicked off in 1939, the Army Air Corps did not have better planes across the board in every aspect of what you need for transports, bombers, trainers, and fighter aircraft. Some places we were better than others, but in a lot of cases we weren't. But Arnold also knew that you couldn't just have the best technology. One can argue that the Luftwaffe had better technology in the air than we did, but they couldn't make enough of it or sustain it enough to make a difference. And that's the other thing that Arnold understood, was you couldn't just build the planes, you had to make sure they could actually fight. And he made sure that we built the base for that. So I'll give you a couple examples of why this happens, why he's a mission-focused business leader, and how he was able to convey his message into his partners. Alexander D. Seversky, one of the great air power inventors, one of the great industrialists in aviation in the 1930s, and just one of the most flamboyant figures you can imagine. Builds a record-setting amphibian, flies around the country with his wife, who's a great aviatrix in her own right, a former dance champion, and their dog, Vodka. Their little Cocker Spaniel was probably more popular than just about any other aviator other than Charles Lindbergh in the 1930s. And they're setting records, and they're getting orders to build planes. But D. Seversky aircraft couldn't build planes in quantity. They had bad management techniques, they had bad manufacturing techniques, they had not modified and modernized. And so when the P-35 went up against the forerunner to the P-40 that was talked about this morning, the P-35 won some contracts, but couldn't win more as it got updated because they as Arnold said in 1936, "You haven't delivered the planes you promised." Now, he said this in a meeting about procurement because that's what the vice commander of the Air Corps did, was ran procurement. But it got back to D. Seversky. And he blamed Hap-Arnold incorrectly for the fact that in a couple of years he lost control of his company. And Republic Aviation became the result because D. Seversky was preventing them from being the kind of company they should be. So they built a couple hundred P-35s and couldn't build more. But the P-47, which is the successor to the P-35, was the most produced American fighter aircraft of World War II, with over 15,000 of them built in a single factory on Long Island. Arnold understood the potential that company had, and he just wanted them to meet it. D. Seversky's board made sure they met it. But for the rest of his life, D. Seversky hated Hap-Arnold. Example number 3, jet propulsion. Comes as a shock. The United States was not the leader in this aviation technology in the 1930s. We weren't even in the race in many ways. We did build great turbo superchargers for our radial engines, and they're very similar to what you have for a jet engine, but they weren't exactly the same. The British were so desperate in 1940 and 41 that they basically, when they decided they'd work with us to win the war, they made an agreement. Churchill said, "Give the United States everything we have," and we were going to do the same kind of exchange. So we learned a lot about radar, because the British had the best radar in the world, and then we learned a lot about jet engines. They gave us Frank Whittle's blueprints. They actually ultimately sent us an engine. Hap-Arnold went over just after the Battle of Britain during the Blitz and was in Britain having all these high-level meetings. He got to see the engine. He got to learn about it. It was the most secret thing that was going on. So he didn't tell anybody directly that he knew about it. But when he got back to the United States, he said, "We need to start getting into this." And he knew the industry so well that he went to Larry Bell, who had his own aircraft company, Bell Aircraft up in Buffalo. They were known for their, how should we say, advanced creative designs. You see up there on the left, that is the XP-1 Aracuda. A lovely plane. Pusher propellers, heavily armed, inherently unstable. A death trap, as it were. About 3 of them were built and tested. I think 2 of them crashed. Creative, but not really good. He's more noted for the plane that's on the upper right, the P-39 Airacobra, and its successor, the P-63. Again, a very creative plane. Put the engine behind the pilot. Have the drive shaft of the propeller go through between the pilot's legs. That frees up room in the propeller hub to put a 30mm cannon, something that we're familiar with the A-10 today. An incredibly effective tank killer, an incredibly effective ground attack platform. If you wanted to get out of the plane, you basically opened a car door. You can imagine how useful this would be when you're trying to bail out. No supercharger, very bad high altitude performance, some limitations as a dogfighter because that engine is such a nice target if you're coming in from behind. So the United States Army Air Forces didn't really use these very much. They were used very early in the war, but quickly phased out. But they became a mainstay for the Soviet Red Air Force because they were very interested in killing German tanks in large quantities, and they didn't care if their guys were sacrificed a lot to make this happen. So it was a very effective platform in that sense. So Bell is kind of underutilized in terms of production and creative capacity by the time the war starts. So Arnold comes back from Britain, picks up the phone, and says, "Hey Larry, come on down, I got something for you." And he calls the head of General Electric. And he says, "Hey, send me some of your engineers. I got something for you guys too." And he gets these 2 guys in the room, and he says, "Here's the deal." And he shows them. "I need a plane that uses this engine. And I need it as fast as possible, and it has to be a complete secret." Now the GE guys were outside of Boston, West Lynn, Massachusetts, and Bell's guys were in Buffalo, so theoretically they could coordinate. But the problem was they couldn't test anything because it was so secret. Couldn't get it in the wind tunnel. So what you see in those 2 other pictures, the picture up on the right and the picture on the bottom, is the Bell XP-59A Aerocomet, a very conservative design. because they really didn't know what the engine was going to have and what its capabilities were and how, other than just a basic outline of where it was going to fit. This is really some creative engineering and contracting, as it were. So the XB-59 is not a notable aircraft. You know, never made it into combat, very disappointing in performance as a two-engine fighter, even though Arnold had great hopes for it, thought its performance would be dramatically impressive. If you go to the Air Force Academy in Arnold Hall, you can actually see a letter that he writes to Larry Bell saying, "I need this plane by 1944 to win the war." But what it did beget was what became the T-33 and the Lockheed P-80, and the genesis of Skunk Works came out of Kelly Johnson and that aircraft. A much better design, a much more sophisticated design for the time, and one that took advantage of being second in the race in terms of knowing what was going on. So Arnold made sure that he got the United States Air Force and the right industries involved in making jet aircraft, which he knew would be the future of aviation. Example number 4, one of my favorites. The development of RAND, Arnold's relationship with Theodore von Karman, and what this bequeaths to us, even to this day, in the United States Air Force. Von Karman was Arnold's go-to guy. Hey, there's these rocket things that are showing up in Europe. Can we build those? How effective are they going to be? Von Karman could sit there and explain what was going on. In 1944, in September of 1944, in a very shadowy meeting held off the runway at LaGuardia Airport in New York, Von Karman and Arnold sat in a car together with nobody else listening. And this is where Arnold supposedly gave to Von Karman his charter. I need you to tell me what the Air Force needs. From science, from technology, from engineering, what's going to happen in aviation and flight. Not just 10 years down, not just 20 years into the future, but 50 years into the future. And I want you to help me figure this out. And I'm going to essentially bake this capability into the United States Air Force when it becomes independent after the war. He gave Von Karman money, he gave him resources, he sent a bunch of Von Karman's guys under Project Lusty. Most people know about Project Paperclip, where the rocket engineers, the V2 guys, von Braun, came over to the United States, were rounded up in Germany as we were winning the war, as we were moving forward, going and seeing that stuff, grabbing those rockets, bringing them back to the States. Project Lusty was Arnold's version of that. Go find out what they're doing in aviation. Swept wings, jet engines, swing wings, all different kinds of advanced aerodynamics and capabilities, reams of documents, tons of pieces of aircraft, literally getting German pilots to fly ME-262s to our bases so that we could ship them back home. And got analysis on all of this going. Von Karman produced a report in 1945 toward New Horizons and laid out the research program that the Air Force would have to take on to make any of this happen. Arnold created the Scientific Advisory Board, or Scientific Advisory Group back then it was called, as a group of engineers and scientists who would advise the Air Force on what was going on. And there was no chain of command between them and the Chief of the Air Corps, Chief of the Air Force. And then he also put an R&D section into the Air Staff for the future. And he made sure that young and talented officers would get into that. At the same time, he's sitting there with his good friend Donald Douglas. He says, hey, I need you to help me too. So Donald Douglas spun off a bunch of his engineers and created the Research and Development Corporation, RAND. Originally a wholly owned subsidiary of Douglas, which meant that they couldn't compete for aircraft contracts, so they quickly spun that off into its own company. But within 2 months of its founding, they produced that report. The potential of an experimental world-circling spaceship. Basically, what you could do with a satellite. And this was written in 1945. All the advantages you could have for communications, navigation, infrared, detecting, all kinds of stuff laid out in this report that became the basis of what RAND would do up to this day in terms of advising the Air Force and other parts of the government on what you can do with science and technology. And all from the fertile mind of Hap Arnold before World War II even ended. He empowered the next generation. He passed the torch to Tooey Spots as his successor, when Arnold retired at the end of World War II. And he took his best operational commander, a guy who wasn't really even a blip on who would become the great commanders in the Air Force. Yeah, Curtis LeMay was the best navigator in the Air Force in the 1930s, when we didn't have navigators, when pilots had to do it as an extra thing. And that meant that most pilots didn't want to do it because it didn't involve flying the plane directly. And LeMay parlayed that into becoming, ultimately the commander who led the B-29 fire raids that defeated Japan. And he put him in as the research and development guy for the first term of his post-war career. So LeMay, an engineer by trade from the Ohio State University. Here we go, I knew there'd be somebody. Okay. He learned firsthand what was in the pipeline in science and technology. He learned who all the guys were. And when he became the commander of SAC 5 years later, he turned that around into making sure that Strategic Air Command was some of the first to really innovate with computers, innovate with command and control technology, and lay the foundation for a lot of the things that we take for granted, or, as I've heard today, complain about in terms of our networks, right? That came out of all of this too. And LeMay was the guy who did it, even though most people think LeMay is not technologically savvy in that sense. Hoyt Vandenberg was one of Arnold's fair young guys. He went from being in charge of the forerunner to the CIA to becoming the second chief of staff of the Air Force. And he laid the foundation for how we would do everything as the Air Force became independent under his watch and get ready to fight the Korean War too. So he had young guys like this in the war advising him, and then those guys went on to continue his vision as they went forward. And perhaps the most important one of his successors is Benny Schriever. Now, Benny was a really good pilot and a really good golfer. Two things that'll get you far in the Air Force. And Benny was also an engineer from Texas A&M. And then he flew, there we go, giggle. And then he flew for the airlines for a while, and then Arnold got him back in the airport, and the war was going on, and he sent him to Stanford to get a master's degree in engineering rather than go fight, because he recognized the potential that Schriever had. He also, Arnold stood in for Benny's wife when they got married, because George Brett was down in the Canal Zone when he married Brett's daughter. That's how close they were. And Benny went on to fly combat missions in the South Pacific and be an engineering officer, which meant he ran all the maintenance for all that stuff. So Schriever knew air power, cradle to grave. He understood science and engineering. And before Arnold left service, he called Schriever to his office and charged him with redeveloping the Air Force to be oriented around science and engineering and scientists and engineers, because that's what it was going to take. And Schriever ended up being the guy who made ICBMs a reality for the United States military and for the United States Air Force, with a very innovative management structure. The kind of outside-the-box thinking, the kind of partnerships that we need to rekindle, and I've heard for this morning, we are rekindling. Because what Schriever did was, I don't have the expertise in the Air Force to make this project happen in time. So we're going to do, and he invented, systems engineering. And he got Simon Remo, who was a really good engineer, and his partner, Will Rich, to work together side by side. Their offices were next to each other, in the SPO, and they didn't develop just one missile. They developed entire families of missiles. They created the aerospace industry based in space and rocketry from scratch. They made sure that we created multiple companies so we could have competitive bidding, so that we could get more places for the best ideas to germinate. At the same time, meeting an urgent national operational requirement to field an ICBM capability before the end of the 1950s. And that's the kind of visionary leadership that Hap Arnold inspired in a guy like Benny Schriever, who was just a bomber pilot when he met him. And this is the kind of stuff that we have as an Air Force in our heritage. Hap Arnold is the exemplar of what we want to have as the father of the Air Force, and it's what every officer and every civilian associated with the Air Force should try to be. He understood every facet of the mission, and he understood how important procurement and logistics would be to winning and fighting. And he's probably the second most famous graduate of Lower Merion High School outside of Philadelphia. Anybody know who the most famous one is? Kobe Bryant. Okay? But Kobe Bryant doesn't have the athletic field named after him like Hap Arnold does. Okay? But maybe the basketball arena will get named after him. And so Hap Arnold's the kind of guy we need to emulate, because he created a true joint force capability that is a war-winning weapon and a deterrent for the United States. And if we get back to following the business practices that he did, I think we'll be successful in the future too. So thank you very much.
Sorry, I'm going to yank him back to the stage for a minute. I just want to say thank you on behalf of the Air Force contracting community for really bringing it home for us and tying how Hap Arnold, to everybody in the Air Force, would recognize as the father of our Air Force. But very few would understand that the connection to what we do in contracting. And I think you've done that very well. So thank you so much for being here today and for delivering that message for us. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate it.
See you guys next week.
Who's ready for lunch? Alright, this is how it's going to work. We're going to pause for 30 minutes. Please use the restroom, stretch your legs. Lunch will be served outside. Grab your food. Please come back to your seats. This will be a working lunch. The presentation will begin at noon, so please be in your seats by noon. Thank you. Enjoy your lunch.